It's time for Supply Chain Now. Broadcasting live from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia. Heard around the world, Supply Chain Now spotlights the best in all things supply chain. The people, the technologies, the best practices, and the critical issues of the day. And now, here are your hosts.
Hey, good afternoon. Scott Luton here with you on Supply Chain Now. Welcome back to the show. Today's episode, we really are going to put our own team on the spot, as our team's going to be sharing a few observations, mainly about two things. First off, we're going to share some key observations from the last 3 months of essential quarantine, at least where we live. And then secondly, we're going to break out the crystal balls and offer a few fearless predictions for what is to come in the path ahead. So stay tuned as we look to increase your supply chain awareness IQ. Quick programming note before we get started. Hey, if you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to find us and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. I want to welcome in our fearless co-hosts, featured guest stars, you name it, on today's show. We have got Amanda Luton, who is the Chief Marketing Officer here at Supply Chain Now, and the Chief Executive Officer, certainly, of the Luton household. Amanda, how you doing?
Hey, I'm great. Thanks for having me. My world debut.
That is right. I'm gonna try to keep from saying honey and babe and that kind of stuff, which our audience may not appreciate. All right. So joining Amanda, of course, is Mr. Greg White, serial supply chain tech entrepreneur, trusted advisor, regular co-host, supply chain adjutant, the entrepreneur whisperer, you name it. Greg, how you doing?
I'm doing great. This is going to be fun.
I think this is going to be fun. This is going to be certainly a departure from most of our 370 some odd episodes. But you know, these are unique times, and if there's ever a time to huddle our team together or some of our team together and kind of see what's between the ears, now is a great time to do that. So, Greg,
it feels like a good time to do it because at least in the States, all 50 states have relaxed restrictions, right? Quarantine restrictions. So maybe it's time for a little bit of a look back and a bit of a look forward.
Agreed. And that's a great point. We are seeing some good news there. We've seen some strides, that flatten the curve, which was the mantra for so long. We've made significant progress there. And Greg, one of the things I like that you have injected a few times in these conversations when that phrase comes up is that the plan was never to eliminate the curve here in the States. It was, and elsewhere, it was to flatten it, right?
Yeah. I mean, the truth is, it was stated early on by a Harvard professor that it was inevitable, was the word, inevitable, that between 40 and 70% of the population would get COVID-19. And in truth, we really need to establish herd immunity. And we've seen some successes in some countries that have been less restrictive. So, I think it's going to be an interesting experiment, and I'm glad we're approaching it with the appropriate caution.
Yeah, absolutely. And who knows, we're keeping our finger on the pulse, Amanda and Greg, but we may end up being in the studio at least more than we are now come July, right?
I sure hope so.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So Amanda's just nodding her head. So I can't wait.
I'm used to being behind the scenes. I'm used to having to be quiet.
Right. So nod out loud.
Yeah,
that's right.
I will. Okay.
Nod out loud. That's a t-shirt.
I'm breaking habit today.
All right. So let's talk about some of the key observations from the last few months of these very unique times. And Greg, we're going to put you on the spot first. What are you thinking? What stands out?
Well, the very first and very biggest thing we've been talking about for so long that it may not feel that big, but as you look back, you realize that this was really the moment, the inflection point for supply chain in the forefront, supply chain as the point of discussion, people actually knowing what you're talking about when you say supply chain. We had started to hear it, even government officials were saying supply chain, but as soon as the pandemic and this seismic societal disruption hit, it came straight to the forefront.
Mm.
So that, that's one of the biggest high points. I think, there are a few other things. The pivots that companies made to making PPE and some of the other humanitarian acts. Our favorite Granddaddy Mims started making hand sanitizer, though it's arguable if they really needed to pivot much to do that, because they were making moonshine before, which is effectively rubbing alcohol. So you may have been just able to rub that
Tastes a little bit better.
Yeah, that's right. And it tastes better.
If you have a hard day, you lick your hands sometimes.
That's right. I think, another couple high points. We discovered that the supply chain is flexible, it is agile, and it is not brittle. It did a definite Kansas City Chiefs defense bend but don't break. But I think it was really encouraging to see that, and another awakening that we need to have as supply chain professionals, and I think we've seen it in the general world and consumers have seen for themselves, is that we consumers are part of the supply chain and we can take charge of an aspect of the supply chain.
Yep.
And I think those are all really things that leapt out at me during the last 10, 12 weeks. And I think they bode well for us as well. They're great indicators.
Yeah, agreed. Good points there. I've got three of my own. And Amanda, I'm dying to learn more about your observation here in a minute. But I think three key things come to mind. There's certainly others, but number one, the adjustments that are needed to be made in order to effectively lead and manage remotely. This past few months was certainly not my first time in a largely remote business or organization, but really I've learned a lot of my past mistakes from some of the things and some of the adjustments I didn't make, and maybe some of the assumptions I made, even though assumptions are arguably more dangerous when they're made remotely versus in person.
Definitely.
So I think just some sheer leadership lessons learned and the adjustments that have to be made to really, for the organization to move forward and work for everybody in a remote environment. I think number two, resilience is such a cliche these days, and it just is what it is. It still is a great word that means a very particular thing. And when I think of resilience these days, I think of the supply chain workforce, and certainly the medical front lines, right? That goes without saying. But for our industry, just how resilient the supply chain workforce was to keep things moving. I mean, yeah, absolutely. We saw some shutdowns. That is inevitable when you're facing the most unique pandemic environment, at least in modern history. And folks still were making it happen, whether they were driving trucks or they were picking some, we basically went through for supply chain a peak season twice. We'll go through a peak season twice in 2020.
Right.
And for things to stay moving, it relies, despite all the automation and technology found in supply chain, thankfully, it takes people to make things happen. And I'm so proud of what we've seen. And I think hopefully in the lasting legacy of this is that I think more leaders will appreciate how we've got to protect that workforce based on some of these lessons learned and the threats we've faced for decades to come. And finally, something that is incredibly timely, I think, for June 3rd, 2020 is empathy and the power of empathy. I think, working remotely, here in Walton County, we've got 3 kids, we've got 2 dogs, we've got a couple businesses, we've got, all the worries and concerns and anxieties that many households had during this pandemic environment. And so to be able to keep work moving, everyone had to be a lot more empathetic, because you're going to have interruptions working from home. So what does that mean? Like, what is the so what there? Well, I think the so what there is outside the pandemic, what's also making the current environment very challenging is the change that is going to happen to correct a lot of the disparities out there, a lot of the lack of opportunities, a lot of the, let's face it, some criminal behaviors taking place, coast to coast. A lot of change has to happen. Well, a lot of that starts with the power of empathy. And I think I'm hoping that in the last few months, as we have had to embrace and lean on that emotional skill set more and more, that experience and lessons learned are going to help us lead and move the needle in ways that it should. So those are three of my observations. Greg and Amanda, any initial responses before we move to getting Amanda's observations?
Well, yeah, I think I think one of the things that we did a really good job of empathizing with was those folks who were on the front line, and a lot of them were unsung or unsuspected heroes: truck drivers, register operators, housekeeping people, right, who are cleaning up the hospitals where the medical professionals are working.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and I think we have to acknowledge also, if we're being empathic, that being shuttered in for 10 to 12 weeks, whatever it's been, it's not natural. And it has created a pent up anxiety that I think is in part responsible for some of the actions that we're seeing now. So, and we have to acknowledge the collateral damage seems to minimize it, but the things that have been, things and people, illnesses and conditions that have been impacted by our singular focus on this pandemic, and acknowledge that we have negatively impacted some people's health by being so singularly focused here. And we need to think about that as well and figure out how to deal better with that in the future.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Amanda, feel free to weigh in on anything that Greg or I have shared.
Yeah,
and of course, we want to also pick your brain on some of your key observations.
Yeah, so I really have one main key observation as it kind of pertains to my personal experience during the pandemic. I've been working from home for 3-4 years now. Working from home is nothing new. I've kind of got my own routine. What I have not done is work from home while simultaneously homeschooling my 3 children, while cooking all 3 meals and all 97 snacks a day for those 3 kids, while cleaning the house, managing all the laundry, while my husband's working at home with me and has, different needs of his own, with our internet bandwidth and this and that. Also thinking about older parents and other family and not to mention just managing the anxiety and uncertainty of a pandemic. So all of those things, all at the same time as a working mother, is extremely overwhelming. Working from home sounds great. And initially, it was, if you think, a couple of days or a week, we've had to do it when the kids are on school break, or if they're homesick or something like that, a couple days here and there is okay and manageable. But long term, working from home is very difficult for working mothers. From what I've seen, just with my personal experience and then some other working mothers that I've spoken with, working moms are kind of ready to get back to the office. They're not as interested. And again, this is not a super broad statement of all working moms or anything, just, the several that I've spoken with, and again, me and my personal experience, they're ready to get back to some semblance of normality. They're, being around people, the social aspect of the workplace, being around their peers, being around their leaders, being visible to the leadership within their office. I do a lot of work with Show Me 50 with Elba Pareja Gallagher, and we do lean in circles typically once a month, once every other month or so. And we did a Zoom call last month. And there were, I don't know, probably 40 of us on the call. But Elba did a poll and, asked the question, how many days a week would you like to work from home? Once kind of everything gets back to quote unquote normal. And it was something like 87% said 1 day a week.
Wow.
Which really, it surprised me because I work from home all the time. So it's going to be 5 days, a week, no matter what. But I was really surprised to see, after they get a taste of staying home all day. And of course, it's different when your kids are at school. But it was not, I think it was a lot of the balancing and juggling everything all at once. But women want to be, they want to be with their peers. They want to be with their coworkers. They want to be out in front, be visible to the leadership within the office. They also feel too, and I can relate to this a bit, they miss out on kind of that work persona that you have when you work from home and your kids are ignoring your boundaries and you're doing work in your pajamas. You don't feel quite as powerful. You don't feel like you're contributing quite as much. You don't feel
quite as official.
Yeah, exactly. But, I know that when I'm at work events or when, I'm at a show on behalf of Supply Chain Now, I have a very different type of confidence than I do when I'm working from home, slogging away on emails in my pajamas. So I think women probably miss that feeling too. They miss that powerful feeling, that different side of themselves that they can, put out there at the office.
Yeah.
Wow.
Going back to what Amanda was saying about clothing, one of the first times, and so Greg, as you've mentioned, for basically almost verbatim the last 2 months and 3 weeks, we have been home and not have been in the studio. All of our shows have been remote, like a lot of folks, right? So naturally, if you don't have to pop on a tie or trousers or slacks or something, you dress very comfortably. Well, a couple weeks ago, I went out for the first time. I had to pick something up for my children at their school, so I had to interact with other adults. Well, halfway there, as I'm driving in my car, I realized I'm still in quarantine clothing, meaning nothing matched, nothing, dog hair everywhere, everything's wrinkled.
So
good thing he did not have to get out of the car, or our 11-year-old
I did.
would have died on the spot.
Oh boy. Well,
that's interesting because I always dress, as you guys know, pretty trashy. So it's not a big deal for me. And what I've realized is that a black Harley T-shirt goes with just about anything.
Right. Well, so I wonder what will be the lingering effect here, because a year or two ago I had lunch with an HR leader at a very large but also very buttoned down conservative company in Georgia. And one of the discussions of our lunch was how resistant the senior levels of leadership have been for casual Fridays, and how if you've got to be on a certain level.
What year was this lunch?
Yeah.
This is about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, just about.
Well, are you serious?
Yes. Wow. And get this. And so the policy was that if you had to be on the executive level of their corporate headquarters, that Friday or not, you had to dress the part, or wear a tie, or at least wear a coat, I think. So now fast forward now, when arguably at least this quarantine has I think perhaps taught us in some cases what is really important in business and what's really important with relationships. Maybe not perfectly, but I think I've had a lot of lessons learned. Will we see a spillover effect to make a lot more business interactions a lot more casual? I don't know. That's a hunch. Greg?
I don't know on that. Having worked in tech for so long, so I think you made me think back to a company I worked at in the 90s, and we had to wear only white shirts, only blue suits, and ties every day. And even, I think it was 1998, we went to casual Fridays, a very, very prescribed casual. right? Still khaki slacks and a polo shirt or whatever, but at least casual.
Mm.
And I think about how out of touch whatever company that is must be with today, or else what level of executive they must be dealing with. It must be Fortune 100, literally, all day and all night. But I think we could see some of that. I think part of the dynamic that we've got to understand too is, and I'd like to get back to a couple of Amanda's thoughts also, but one of the dynamics that we have to understand is we've been left largely to our own thoughts and our very inner circle of people's thoughts for a long time. And I think when we do come back together, we might discover a bit different than our self-focused perceptions. Right? I mean, I think we'll see some things go somewhat back to normal, but I think I'll tell you this: I am no fan of Adam Newman, the founder of WeWork, and I'm going to enjoy watching him implode.
Oh no!
When even we, and in all seriousness, right? WeWork, their model is the most flexible, and so many companies are talking about working from home. Amanda, what you found though is surprising and counterintuitive. I think
I
to what
thought
a
so
lot of us
too.
thought, and maybe that isn't going to happen. Maybe it's not that people are going to break their leases.
Yeah.
Lots of companies are talking about that, but the fact is, if you've got a 5, 7, or 10-year lease, you don't just walk away from that.
Point.
Because you still pay for it.
That's right. So let's talk about another interesting company that is really unique. That the last. Did you want to weigh in before we move?
I just had maybe one more comment share.
Sorry, yeah.
Well, talking about kind of getting back to normal and women going back to work, and kind of figuring out what's most important and figuring out, where companies can cut back or make changes.
Right.
I think a lot of people, as they've been working from home, have recognized a better work-life or work-family balance. Because Greg, your reaction, of surprise, Scott, yours too. I was pretty surprised too, actually, because I thought women working from home would realize that it's pretty great and it's flexible and everything. But I thought they would probably want to stay, working from home. But we, with a lot of people realizing this new work-life balance, I think a lot of working moms had already kind of figured that out. I know that, my experience working from home, I want to keep a balance. I want to make sure that I'm present for my kids, present for my husband, when everybody's home. So the way that I've worked it all out is that once the kids go to school and I come back to work or come back home, I barely move from my desk. I get all my day's work done, from 8:30 until 3:30 when I go pick them up. So I had figured out kind of that work-life balance already. Even though I really don't think there's any such thing as a work-life balance. It's really, when you're working 100%. When you're at home with your family, you're present 100%. That's very difficult. And it's 100 times more difficult to do when it's all combined and it's all right there in the same place. So, their family work balance was already figured out. It was already working. They were working when the kids were at school or when they were home with their families. They were very present. And then to combine the two, to mix it all up, was a real rude awakening, or maybe not a rude awakening, but just a real shock to the system. And so, getting that, their real work-life balance back, I think is going to be super important for them.
Mm-hmm.
So wanted to throw that in too.
I think it's interesting when you think about the perspective that so many people have that people will want to work from home. And you think about the other dynamic that we've heard, which is people are having difficulty shutting off work and they're working 2-3 extra hours a day.
That was already our problem
at home
to start with.
Right. Well, I remember, my kids are older now, but I remember you work, you come home, you play, you have dinner, you read them a book or whatever, help them with their homework, you put them to bed, you go back to work. Right. So,
and that's exactly our routine. And what's difficult, is when it's all combined and it's all, you have to do all of it at the same time. Exactly. There are no boundaries, especially with small children.
Yeah.
And, as a working mom guilt is a real thing. And it's real and present even when you're doing a good job. But then when you're juggling everything and you feel like you're not doing a good job at anything, it's 10 times worse. And you're still working just as hard and you're still giving all the time and attention that you have to your family. That's very difficult. That's why I feel like that, being a work from home mom has just been so taxing and is so burdensome for a lot of women.
Yeah. And maintaining a routine is difficult. It is.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
Nobody has their own routine or boundaries anymore. Right. It's interesting. That's a really interesting perspective. I'm glad you shared that because I had not thought of it that way. But see, that's exactly the point that I was making earlier. I think when we are able to get back into our social circles or our work circles and discuss these things, we'll put some moderation into it because this was not a moderated response. One day, and literally for the three of us, right, and all of our people at Supply Chain Now, one day we were at work. The next day, we were in
literally. So very true.
Well, so let's segue to the next topic, because I think if we look at some of the things out there that made the transition easier, it's never easy, and certainly made the quarantine easier, is some of the e-commerce services out there, right? Some of the digital services. And one of them in particular that made our life easier here, Amanda, was Instacart.
Right.
And the folks, I tell you, they never missed a beat, it seems like. Now, I've read about other geographic markets and some of the challenges there, but here for us, we never experienced it. So some of our listeners, I bet, have never used Instacart. So keep that in mind. But I'd love for you to share kind of how we've utilized Instacart, what it is, how it's worked, and how it's worked in particular the last 2.5 months. Tell us more.
Yeah. So, again, kind of work-life balance kind of a thing. I meal plan for our family. I plan out all our meals as best I can, usually about a week, 2.5 weeks out or so. But a while back, I love cooking.
What an exception you are. First of all, let's start with that.
Well, cooking it's a real passion of mine. I really enjoy it. I mean, so that's why I don't do a lot of things that I don't like to do. But in cooking and meal planning really is one of them. So I've always liked doing that, but grocery shopping is so time consuming. And I don't think anybody, can disagree with that, especially when you're planning meals. But so way back, and Scott and I, we really try to focus our time on things, that either we're dedicating time to the family or to the business. And if there's something that we can make more efficient, we do it. So it's been a couple of years since we started using Instacart, which Instacart is a group of wonderful people that will go grocery shopping for you. You submit your list, you pay for it. They go and do all the shopping, and then they bring it to you. Depending on your geographical area, it can be, your local grocery stores. It can be a local pharmacy. Our Instacart will deliver from Costco. I mean, there's lots of different options. Sprouts, different types of grocery stores. We typically stick with Kroger, but they do a wonderful job. And there's a great app that I use on my phone. So if, there's something that's out, the shopper will offer substitutions. They'll take pictures to ensure that it's correct item, all those kinds of things. So we've been using it for a while for my one weekly big shopping trip. But we would still, no matter what we did, we'd have to stop into the grocery store for a couple extra things, or we forgot this or that, or the kids need some school supplies or whatever. But so once the pandemic hit, and actually I remember when we were at Modex that Thursday, March 12th or March 11th, whatever that Thursday was.
Yeah, it was Friday the 13th the next day.
Yeah. Okay. So the 12th, we were all talking about, we need to get home, who knows what's going to happen. And I was literally on my computer at our booth at Modex, placing my Instacart order for it to be delivered, by the time we got home. Because I knew I didn't want to go to the grocery store. I'm high risk for COVID-19 because I have asthma. So I knew that I wanted to stay at home as much as physically possible. But why not utilize this amazing service that has really done great by us for several months prior. So we have been ordering. I don't think Scott or I has stepped foot in the grocery store. We've had a couple of other trips to, random places here or there, but we've not had to go into the grocery store at all, for going on 3 months now because of the great people at Instacart that will shop for you and provide that service.
Yeah, loved it. I mean, those people, going back to Greg, and you've done a great job in particular of keeping those retail workers in that conversation when we talk about protecting the supply chain workforce, because they are absolutely critical, and they're perhaps amongst the most at risk.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
they're around so many people right there in kind of the ground zero at the grocery stores.
So, God bless every single one of those Instacart workers that kept keeping things moving. And while Amanda, shared that we do have that at-risk component in our family, still there's many other families that had a much bigger component of that, because maybe their parents, their senior elderly parents live home with them, or some of the other conditions that really makes the pandemic even much more dangerous. So to think of how Instacart serves those families as well, it's just really amazing how that has digitized. But despite the fact that, of course, you're going to have physical goods until who we were talking about earlier today about digital Oreos, Greg. I can't remember. They don't taste quite as good.
Not nearly as delicious.
Yeah. Gosh.
Air Sam. Oh, it was one of the leading supply chain associations. A leader.
Oh, right. That's right. Was it Rick Blaskin?
It sure was. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But I'd just like to say he maybe went a step too far. He wanted to have it transported right into your stomach, but he said Oreos.
That's no fun.
No, I mean the whole point. You could have it. You should have it be able to be made right in front of you, right? You could.
Oh gosh, that would be
on-demand
Oreos. That is
3D printed Oreos, right? And then you could also limit yourself by the way. I only want 5 3D printed, right? And also a glass of milk.
That's right. Got to 2%.
Yeah.
But the cool thing is we saw folks that typically haven't leveraged services like that.
Yeah.
To train themselves. I mean, hey, look, I'm probably the slowest thinker certainly out of these 3 here on this podcast. So I'm slow to learn anything new. But my mom jumped on Instacart once she found out about it.
Yep.
And she also, she like most folks, they stay home during the quarantine. They started using it. And when we had wipes, we probably wiped down some of the packages as they arrived.
We wiped down the groceries,
yeah. But still, it was really a success story for e-commerce, food industry, grocery business, retail, you name it. And just high fived all those people over at Instacart.
Well, and Scott's right. I mean, they barely missed a beat. I think the worst delay we had was, I placed an order at 5:00 and it had to be delivered the next day because there weren't enough, people shopping to get it there, I don't know, by 8 or whatever. But they really stayed on top of it, and they provided a service for a lot of people in need,
That's right.
People that needed to be home for medical reasons, or they had, somebody high risk in their family or whatever, or just didn't feel like getting out, and being exposed. So
that last mile supply chain, we've talked a lot about this, Greg, about how supply chain is going to lead us right out of this pandemic. Well, I hate to make this too dramatic, but this last mile of supply chain of Instacart delivery really, I think, served a lot of families and helped us flatten the curve in a very meaningful way. So, don't want to make this an Instacart commercial, but it's one of those case studies.
Maybe we could.
Yeah, we probably. It's one of those case studies. I think all the different topics through all the different episodes that we talk about when it comes to supply chain. Of course, those that probably mean that are easiest to digest is what you use in your home, right? Day in, day out, week in, week out. That's where I think that intersection of business and industry with you as a consumer is so fascinating. So anyway, Greg, before we pivot once more, and we're using our newest friends, Luke and Amalia's favorite term there.
Right. And one of the most used words.
One of the most used,
during
absolutely.
COVID-19.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. The most used word in podcasting also. Very good. We've got them all covered. Now we got to say blockchain, IoT, AI.
So what was there any new technology, new platform, new tool that you and your family either used more of or came across and started using these last 3 months? Anything come to mind?
We didn't really use it, but we did get my father on Instacart because he lives fairly close to us, and we were going to get his groceries. And at some point, I just said, "Okay, we're in the peak of this thing, Dad. No one is going to get your groceries anymore. Here's Instacart." And he had already been using ClickList at Kroger, which is order and buy it
And you pick
online,
it up.
personal shopper, and they bring it out to you in your car. So he was familiar with how to do it. All he had to do was wait for delivery. So I'm trying to think if we did. I can tell you this: my home studio looks a lot different than it did before the pandemic. So there are a few, and thanks to you guys, by the way, for sending me a couple of headsets and there are a few electronics that I'm using that I wasn't before, but gosh, I'm trying to think. I don't think so. You know, a lot of what we have discovered is it's more, what do I want to say, ethereal than that, right? It's not.
And what does that mean?
Such. Yeah, right. Yeah. You know, things we've discovered in our heads, right? You know, and you mentioned it. You mentioned one kind of discovery, lesson learned, whatever you want to call it, Amanda, which is even the most introverted among us are more social than we have been for the last 10 to 12 weeks, right?
I saw the funniest meme that was something like, I know I'm a homebody, but man, I like going one or two places.
Right.
And that's how I felt. Because initially, it wasn't that bad having to stay home all the time. But after 6 weeks or whatever, I'm like, all right, I'd like to go somewhere.
No, actually, now that you say that, you said meme, and it made me think of Facebook. So I have actually used Facebook, and I have a friend. She was a retail exec when I was just coming into retail technology, Dina Schumann, and she was a heavy hitter, general merchandise manager at a big retailer, always very confident, funny, a great leader, incredibly knowledgeable on retail. And now she is collecting like 10 or 12 memes a day and posting them. So I guess I got a random alert from Facebook, and that got me actually using it. And some of those are hilarious. So I am using Facebook, and that also leads to a recognition that we saw, which is more people are using Facebook as a pseudo business platform because we get a ton of listens, tens of thousands of listens, views of our content on Facebook now. And we were already still in shock from Instagram becoming a business platform, and then Facebook hits us in the face. So,
well, you're right. The city's micro trends take place, and we'll see which ones stick, which is kind of where we're headed to next. But it's been fascinating. It really has. So, go ahead, Greg.
Before we go into our crystal ball, were we going there next? Or
we were, but go right ahead.
I'd love to share a few lessons learned and maybe elicit a few lessons learned from you all. Some of these are higher level, and some of them are, they're not celebrations so much as just a lesson learned, right? So the most introverted thing is one of those, and I think there are some of these that we need to take forward into the future, and that will shape our forward look, or should shape our forward look. One is that we can live without many of the things we thought we needed. Right? I mean, how many people are buying Gucci, right now. I can tell you not many, because lots of those big brands are going broke, the big luxury brands, right? I think one thing that, Scott, we probably knew, but we didn't realize until we had to give a half dozen or a dozen interviews to TV and radio stations and news networks, is that a couple things. One, that thing that we talked about earlier, the supply chain is more resilient than I think even I expected. And the other is that no supply chain methodology is prepared for a disruption, not of the pandemic, because the pandemic wasn't even the biggest disruption. This seismic societal disruption, as Brad Jacobs has coined the phrase, wherein we essentially ceased the normal society, ceased normal commerce, where that impacted things so broadly. You can't predict that. For instance, toilet paper was always a big topic, right? And I think people blamed things like lean or just-in-time inventory, but the truth is demand went up 753% in one day.
Yep.
No product of any kind in any supply chain using any methodology could survive that. So those are things that I think not only we as professionals, supply chain professionals, need to learn, but we need to also communicate that to our fellow consumers to have them have that recognition.
Yeah.
It's infeasible to plan for the kind of disruption that we've just recently had. Yep. So
huge lesson learned. And managing expectations is really important. And and we're not pointing any fingers. We're guilty of it right here in our household. You expect things to happen just when you need it. That instant gratification that we as consumers, especially here in the States, have come to expect. And I'm guilty as charged. And those expectations become highly unrealistic as we see some of the challenges roll out across the globe. And also, as you point out, when demand due to hoarding behaviors and other things move 700 points and more year over year, holy cow, who can keep up with that seismic demand shift, to steal some of your phraseology there? So well said, as always, Greg. As always. Are you ever not well spoken, Greg? That's the $1 trillion question.
I'm terribly poorly spoken, but you gave me 15 minutes to prepare, so I put two thoughts together.
So what will be
which is a tremendous, as anyone who's watched our show knows, that they must believe that 15 minutes of preparation is a tremendous amount compared to what I usually do. So,
all right. All right. So
you make a good point, Scott, and that is, I think we need to, the hoarding was a reversion of us consumers to our lizard brain, right? To our survival instincts. And I
fear.
think one of the things that I saw is that we need intervention to throttle our survival instincts. It hurts me to say that because I'm not a huge fan, because I know who's going to intervene, right? Not a huge fan of disrupting commerce, but we need some sort of intervention because, as you said, guilty as charged. We didn't mean to do it. But we now have more toilet paper than we need, right? And I just posted an article about the returns that retailers are expecting because of the hoarding behavior and pantry stuffing, as whoever coined that phrase. That's brilliant. Pantry stuffing that people have done, and the things that they expect people to return. So, I think that's an important recognition, and we need to, and it's difficult to when your mind is turned upside down.
Right.
We need to throttle ourselves, but to whatever extent we can. I think the retailers have stepped up in good measure to do that and to be fair on behalf of the rest of society.
Agreed. Yeoman's work is taking place, and it'd be interesting to see just how much better supply chain professionals, supply chain leaders, global supply chains, you name it, are better off and much more prepared in the months to come. So, all right. So let's talk about the months to come. Let's talk about some bold, fearless predictions that there are no guarantees in life to begin with. But Greg, we're going to put you on the spot first, and we're going to ask that you drag that Kansas City Chief red-colored crystal ball from your closet, where you have all of your Atlanta tennis champion golden plates enshrined.
Right.
And
we need a Supply Chain Now tennis tournament, I think.
that's a great point. We will get that. Will be.
I've heard you're quite the player, so I'm a little bit afraid. I heard that you blew the last guy you played right off the court. So
I did.
Who shall remain nameless,
but he knows who he is.
All right, so let's talk what lies ahead. Break out your crystal ball, Greg, and give us a fearless prediction or two.
Mass reshoring will not happen.
Yep.
I think we all want it to happen, and we believe that it can, but a mass reshoring will not happen. We may see some nearshoring. We'll see some China plus 1, 2, 3. We will see some reshoring, but it won't be. We won't bring back, quote unquote, in the macro sense, manufacturing. On the other hand, automation, technology, digital transformation, robotics will be ignited and will enable mass production at a reasonable cost to enable China plus 1, plus 2, plus 3 manufacturing. And it will enable us to do it at a reasonable, though probably higher cost than currently products are produced in China. And it will have an actual beneficial impact on jobs that are reshored. So essentially what I'm saying is we have to replace some portion of an 805 million person workforce in China in order to reshore jobs. That's impossible, even if you combine the economies of virtually every country in the world except India. We couldn't do it. And moreover, those jobs pay approximately $10,000 a year in China. So we can't practically do it either. Mm-hmm. So we'll see some of those jobs come back in order to both at least approximate, if not equate, the volume of production capacity that China has, and at a value that is roughly $10,000 a year. That will absolutely require robotics. It will also require a certain type of product, right? Not every product can be produced with robotics, strangely.
Right.
Maybe someday they will. But I see us, and fortunately I got to have a phone call with Tom Valentine yesterday, as you and I both did, and Tom recognizes that there are some regulatory challenges that forced a lot of these jobs offshore. For instance, a lot of pharmaceuticals, which we're really, really concerned about right now, used to be made in Puerto Rico. But the incentives that kept the big drug makers there and kept people employed in what I would argue is almost the 51st state. I'm a big Puerto Rico fan. I have a lot of friends down there. And but what kept those people employed were a lot of those jobs. And when those jobs went away, we had an incredible unemployment problem, and of course the government became insolvent in Puerto Rico. So maybe we reinstitute some of those incentives and bring companies back there.
Yep.
This is a big one. A lot of people won't agree with this, and I don't care. We will realize that we made a bad decision by instituting a mass lockdown, a mass quarantine. And doing so in such short, dramatic, and poorly constructed order. We could have easily protected people like Amanda, right? And my father and your parents, by quarantining those people and the people who work with them on a daily basis and that sort of thing, but mitigating earlier. And we could have been more open about the use of PPE. We could have done some of the things that were done in Sweden. I think Sweden is a good example. Of course, they have had a large outbreak, but not an excessive amount. relative to some other countries. But I think we'll realize that shutting down the entire economy of the entire planet on a moment's notice was a bad decision. And this is further. This is, in my opinion, irrefutable because it happens every single time we have a disruption like this. And that is in 7 to 10 years, it will be as if none of this ever happened.
Right. Agreed. And I'm going to touch on some of that in my fearless predictions. Greg, before we move over to Amanda, have we emptied your crystal ball?
You have emptied it.
Okay.
I noticed that there's not a lot of discussion around it either. So if I were you, I would not take a position on it either. Just let me burn all the way.
All right. So Amanda, and it's tough to challenge what's going to happen. I mean, we're all trying to look around corners. So I think you've made some very interesting points that we'll have to dive into in the next episode. So Amanda, lay it on us. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah. So mine it directly relates back to my key observation. We all think that working from home is going to be a major component of, the new culture of most companies going forward. But I don't think it's going to be a full-time or a 5-day-a-week kind of thing. Maybe it'll be an option. Companies that were strongly opposed to working from home options may bend a little. Or if it was, an option before, maybe it'll be a more broad option going forward. Maybe it's 1 to 2 days, but I don't think we're going to have this massive shift from traditional offices and workspaces to it's not going to be an all or nothing kind of thing. I think it's going to be some sort of a blend. Women will adjust. They'll create more flexibility, as they work from home, and working mothers especially. And maybe that will mean meal planning and child rearing and household responsibilities that typically, or generally, I should say, fall to women will be adjusted and shared more with their partners so that the burden is not so heavy on the mothers in the family. But the in-person aspect, the social aspect of the traditional office is still very important. And I think it's especially important for women that are looking for more visibility in their jobs, in their positions, in their offices. They want to be seen and they want to be heard by their leaders, which, of course we've got Zoom calls, but it still is pretty easy to be unseen during a Zoom call, even if you're, speaking out loud, because people can go off the screen or they can be halfway paying attention. It's very different still than being in person right in front of somebody where you can read their body language. You can really directly see what they're doing and what they're thinking. Women that are looking for growth in their roles in their organizations. There's a lot of debate about if the whole pandemic has set women back from the progress that they've seen in the workplace, being more visible and, being in front of their leadership. So I think it's going to be, and like I said before, there's a lot of working moms that are anxious for their kids to go back to school. And it may look very different, of course, and it may be lots of flexibility and lots of creative work from home juggling, and who knows what that's going to look like. But I don't see it as an all or nothing thing. I think it's going to be a real good blend, hopefully a good blend of a flexible kind of working conditions, as far as being at home versus the office.
Yeah, love that. There's going to be so much from just a workforce management, how work gets done, how stuff gets done. So many dynamics that and key takeaways from the last 2 or 3 months will impact all of that for so many organizations. I mean, look, automotive manufacturers, it's kind of tough to work from home and build cars. So naturally, they're going to have less key takeaways. However, I would one of my hunches is some of their engineers and some of the other designers that could work
their
from
marketing
home.
Teams.
Yeah, their marketing teams. And so there'll be certain plays they can take out of the playbook. And as we all know, as spent some time in the recruiting side, that's what a lot of top talent wants. They want that flexibility. Mm-hmm. And so I think smart and shrewd organizations will figure out how they can get their cake and eat it too. How can they get stuff done while still affording as much flexibility as possible?
Well, and I think even more than, the flexibility is they want the choice of the flexibility. They want to have the option of working in the office or working from home. I think a lot of people, coming into the workforce don't necessarily like to be told how they are going to work.
Right.
They like to have the options there so that they can choose what works best for their family, for their situation, for their circumstances.
Yep. Agreed. All right. Good stuff there. I'm gonna be really quick on mine, and then we'll close out maybe with a couple of final thoughts from Greg and Amanda. So 3 things here. First up is I'm going to piggyback on what Greg shared about nearshoring and reshoring. Yeah, we're going to see some activity come out of China, undoubtedly. All right, it'll be moved to other parts of Asia. It'll be some of it will be reshored, some of it will be nearshored, some of it will go to Europe. I've seen reports related to 5G infrastructure. And some of the European companies that could be big winners there. However, this is, how did Greg put it? Irrefutable. This is the irrefutable truth that China is a critical player in the global manufacturing industry. And what's also irrefutable is American consumers in particular. I won't speak for others because I'm not a European consumer, but we are still in love with low prices.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's
absolutely.
one of the biggest reasons we have global supply chains.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we can mitigate a large degree of the quality issues and the safety issues we've seen in especially in recent months related to PPE, and there's some big questions, as Greg put it, in that pharmaceutical industry, but there's also some long-held alliances and deep-rooted segments of the supply chain that is in China and India, and that's going to be next to impossible to move, especially when you're serving a consumer, or at least a big segment of the consumer here in the States that's on a fixed budget. Okay, let's reshore all the pharmaceuticals and then pay tenfold what they were.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, imagine, and I'm being a bit dramatic, but prices will go up if for many of the products
even if we come back to Puerto Rico, you're right.
Right. That's right. Okay, so that's point one. And again, it's important to point out, I love the idea of reshoring and building U.S. manufacturing industry. That's good. That's great. And it's not just great for the country; it's great for the industry. However, we got to be practical about this. Secondly, food supply chain. Greg loved the episode. Greg and Amanda loved the episode with Tosca. We're big fans of Mike Wasson and Aubrey Duncan. Love how much they've grown and love what their model does in food industry. It reduces so much waste, empty miles, all that stuff. What we've also learned of food supply chain is we've got these twin channels: commercial, right, food, from growing it to processing it, to packaging it, to delivering it. That commercial channel looks a lot different than the retail channel, and a lot of the insiders already knew that, but I think a lot of consumers have painfully realized or learned that lesson in the recent months, as we've seen, as Greg termed it, the culling of the livestock because they couldn't get it, into processing plants for a variety of reasons. So 2 thoughts here. I think number one, we are absolutely going to see more interconnectivity and a lot more effective overlap as needed between these 2 channels. I mean, undoubtedly, there's got to be some things that they could repackage that could serve both channels, or there's going to be some improvements there, undoubtedly, to avoid a lot of the waste we've seen here in recent months, unfortunately. And secondly, and Greg, we've talked about this, lean is a good thing. There are companies and leaders that have misused lean. They have wrapped workforce reductions in the lean flag, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
That is not lean. That is not lean. As grocery supply chains and management practices have really leaned and streamlined the amount of product that's in these regional distribution centers, so there's less product that they can be sent out to store 607 that all of a sudden has had a run on sugar or whatever. We're going to see some revisiting of some of those ratios and those methodologies so that they can be better prepared to fulfill in broader disasters. Not quite, it'll be tough to always to plan for a global pandemic, but we're going to see some revisiting of those methodologies. And finally, what pains me to say it, Greg, do you like time travel?
I don't know. I've never even seen Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Well, that is one of the more disappointing facts about Greg White I have heard in a long time. Bill and Ted are legends in this house. But we've all loved the notion, I think, of traveling back in time, right?
Sure.
Greg?
Fix mistakes.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we should all be very envious
disasters.
Then of Major League Baseball, because the owners,
oh boy,
the front office, and the players are not acting like it's 2020. They literally are back in 1994, right? We need baseball. Americans, the world needs baseball. We need a departure. Other countries have figured out how to make it work. And we've got Major League Baseball, and we're not going to cast one party over the next. All of them can't figure it out. And it's like they're living in a vacuum, right? Years ago. And so my bold prediction is, unfortunately, there is not going to be a 2020 season. And that is a travesty. It's a shame. Will Haraway, a friend of the show, great Cardinals fan.
Yeah, he could explode without a Cardinals game. Yeah.
You're right. We talk a lot, and we would love to talk more baseball this time of year. He let off a work-related text to me just last week about how the Braves and Cardinals should just be wrapping up a recent series, and we should be giving each other a hard time. It is a travesty. It is a travesty. And I got to say this. I am disappointed in Rob Manfred's leadership as commissioner of Major League Baseball. I was disappointed with how he handled and Houston, I love you. It's nothing to do with the city, but the Astros cheated, and I did not like. I think he really let down the sport.
Yep.
And with how that was handled. So I'll stop there, but it really does pain me as a huge Braves fan and comfort food. Braves baseball is comfort food around here.
Well, the Braves playing in the background is as much a commonplace, background noise as the kids yelling at each other.
That's true.
It's a part of our lives. And it really is a shame. Actually, the other night I was making dinner. I was like, Scott ought to turn the Braves game on, and no Braves game.
Yeah, that's a shame. So on a much lighter note there, I mean, if the worst challenge that the three of us will face and our listeners will face is a void of baseball, that's not a bad life, right?
That's true.
Times are still good. So trying to keep things in perspective, because as we all know, there are much bigger issues that we're all struggling to solve and to drive change in. And we'll touch on a lot more of that in the weeks to come. But let's close out there. So, I want to ask both of y'all for final thoughts and final brief thoughts. I think three of us set out to do a 30-minute conversation, and we start talking about things we love to talk about, and we go an hour. So, Greg,
but we can't be bound.
I know. I'm not surprised at all, actually.
We cannot be bound. What is your the phrase, Greg? Your infamous tagline is, "I refuse to be bound."
Oh, yes. I'm willing to acknowledge reality, but I refuse to be bound.
Love that. Love that. And it's so true with Greg White. Okay, so Greg, final thought for our audience here as we wrap up a really unique episode, kind of a look back and a look ahead.
It's rare that we share only our views, and I'm glad we did it. And I feel like, and I think, Amanda, I bet you might have overheard this conversation. We were thinking with the trigger sort of all 50 states having relaxed restrictions, that it was a great time for a look back, and I'm glad we did it. And I think it frankly gave me some opportunity to have some perspective on the last 10, 12 weeks. It allowed us to dredge up some things that seemed like they never happened. But, Amanda, when you talked about Modex and Scott, you talked about other things that happened so long ago. It seems like so long ago. It wasn't really that long ago.
Right.
And I have to tell you, I am chomping at the bit, embracing the opportunity for society to get back to some sense of normalcy. And I'm not going to say those words, those two words that are so irritating to people right now. But to get us back to moving the direction of getting back to being a society. And I see this as a point of encouragement. Look, we may deal with COVID-19 for the rest of our lives. Just like we deal with the common cold, just like we deal with pneumonia, we may have to learn to live in it. My great concern is that, like we've had the the ice age and the stone age and the industrial age and whatever age, my great fear is that some point in history people will look back on this and say this was the hysterical age where we overreacted to so many things. And one of the things I want to take ownership of myself is I want to not be hysterical. I want to encourage people to dig deep and discern deeply, to understand what's really happening, to understand beyond the media patter or Twitter or sound bites from government officials and whatnot, to really think through what's happening and to discern for yourself. And you're going to have to dig deep to do it, because objective journalism is dead. I think we all have to acknowledge that. Yeah,
discernment is something we all could benefit from having a lot bigger doses of in our day-to-day decision making and perspective, really. All right, Amanda.
I had kind of a realization just now that I'd like to share. I've sat through and listened to how many 370 something episodes now.
Yeah.
And loved every moment of it.
Whether you liked it or
No, so I've listened to all these episodes, but just a little bit ago when Scott said, I'd like for you to join us on the podcast. I'm like, what do you mean? Like actually on the podcast, not just listening and, engaging with listeners. And I got super nervous. I got to admit, I got really nervous. But I said, yes, I'm going to do this. I'm going to step out and let myself be in the spotlight for a moment. And it's been great. I mean, I hear a lot of guests say, well, gosh, that wasn't as bad as I expected, or that was really fun. You guys made this so fun. But, what we're noticing too in the, on LinkedIn, we've seen a lot about how there's not a lot of women on panels. There's not a lot of women being featured on podcasts. And after we asked a couple more questions, it's not that women are not being asked to be on the shows or on the panels, but that a lot of women are saying no. They're getting scared, or they don't have that confidence, or they're suffering from, imposter syndrome, which is certainly such a real thing. So I would like to challenge women, if you get offered a panel, position, take it. Just say yes. Just do it. It's not as scary as you think it's going to be. It's 10 times worse worrying about it. And Greg, you said that, it's a good day if you prepare 15 minutes for a podcast. I was literally, up until 10 minutes ago, still scribbling notes, for what I was going to say, still trying to prepare myself. But just say yes, just commit to it, do your homework, be prepared, but then have some confidence in your expertise, in your position, in your role, and then show people, what you can do. It's not that scary, and we need to hear more female voices. I'm sure that, Scott lives with me 24 hours a day, but I'm sure he didn't realize the perspective from a, working mom on the burden of the pandemic and how it's affected me. People need to hear our voices and need to hear our stories. So I challenge women to say yes.
Love it. I love a good challenge at the end of an episode. Yes.
That's great.
Yep. Appreciate that, Amanda. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for stepping through that door on a last minute invite.
It was really fun.
Microphone.
When's the next one? Can I be on tomorrow?
Let's do it. New series announced here.
New host, right?
Well, this has been great. Really enjoyed it. To our listeners, if you've made it this far, of course, this is a lot different than I think a lot of our shows, but it's good to sit down and reflect a bit, and especially reflect as a team, because you spend so much time knocking out work, driving production, managing and delivering relationships, you name it, but rarely do you sit down and spend about an hour 15 reflecting as a team on where we've been and where we're headed. And that's really what makes up this episode. So hopefully our listeners dig it as much as we have enjoyed it. All right, so with all that said, Scott Luton here. I'm going to close out for Greg White and Amanda. Really appreciate their time today. To our listeners, be sure to check out our wide variety of industry thought leadership resources at supplychainnowradio.com. Of course, find us and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. On behalf of the entire team, Scott Luton wishing you a very successful week ahead. Lots of changes got to happen. But you know what? Undoubtedly, in the weeks and months ahead, everyone is going to have much, much more brighter days. So we'll see you next time here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.